the record.
There's a recording in progress, so watch what you say. uh, Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started with our brainstorming our human connection again. And we have some exciting, again, human connections coming up. Our guest today is Phyllis Cole-Dai. I've known Phyllis for, God, it seemed like forever now. But even though she looks like she's 13, she's older than that. Not as old as I am, but but and she's done a lot of interesting things and is a very interesting person, has had a very interesting life. So we're not going to get to know all of the things about Phyllis today, but we're going to be treated to some of her insights into, we can just say broadly, human connections, because she's an author. And as an author, she has explored some interesting aspects of our human connection. So welcome, Phyllis. And let's start off with the 50,000-foot view of, or elevator speech of, who is Phyllis Cole-Dai?
Ooh, should I give you my husband's answer, my son's answer?
Well, whatever your elevator speech is, just the generic, the generic Phyllis Cole-Dai. I don't know if we can handle the real one.
That's right. Yeah. Well, first of all, just let me say thank you to you for hosting this and being willing to talk with me again. And thanks to everybody who is part of the conversation. And I hope we do get to a more conversational part rather than just me yakking at you. And I especially want to thank the South Dakota Humanities Council, and happy birthday. Because the council has been a constant presence in my life since I moved here from my home state of Ohio back in 2000, and I can't imagine my life without it. So it's a real pleasure to be part of the celebration. So who is Phyllis? Well, I'm a farm kid originally from Ohio, and the trajectory of my life has taken me a lot of places, but I think the thing that defines my life is that I'm concerned about using the arts to build bridges of understanding across what divides us. And so that takes me right into the humanities, and that's probably a good place to stop the elevator speech.
Okay, so you have had, as you mentioned, a rather long history with the Humanities Council. And as we are exploring where it's been, where it is now, and hopefully where it's going in the future, can you tell us a little bit about the kind of experiences you've had with the South Dakota Humanities Council?
Yeah, well, it's rich. So I could go on at length, but let me try to sum up. First of all, I have been enriched just as a person living in South Dakota by attending numerous events that have been funded by the council. And one of the main events, obviously, is the book festival, which is just a delightful time of reunion and rubbing shoulders with kindred spirits and other creatives, and with the reading public, which my work reaches out to. So those special events are part and parcel of my life. Another thing is I'm on the Humanities Council Speakers Bureau, and so I've been able to travel to different places in the state, get familiar with communities that I might never have ventured into otherwise. Had just wonderful conversations that go deeper into our human connection. In that way. And so if you are interested in having me as a speaker. I do most of it digitally now because it's cheaper for everybody and it takes less time on the road in this very big state of ours. So, but I'm happy to talk with anybody about doing a presentation. And I've gotten a grant in support of my work before. So there are just so many ways being able to exhibit at the book festival and to often present there about things that as a writer I'm interested in engaging with readers around. It's just a rich ongoing conversation that takes many forms.
It's an interesting conversation, but also I think there are values that come with those conversations, results of the conversations. Uh, can you speak a little bit about some of the exchanges that you have experienced, some of the interactions that have come from your talking about various subjects as a humanities scholar or being an author? What kind of opportunities have you seen that allows you to impact people's lives?
Mm, mm. Well, one thing is I wrote a memoir once called The Emptiness of Our Hands, which is about 47 days that I lived by choice on the streets of Columbus, Ohio. And I went to the streets to practice being present to whoever I would meet. The book is really a window onto what can happen to a person when suddenly they find themselves without stable housing. And you know, when I experienced that, I was still living in Ohio, but then right after it, while I was still working on the book, I moved to South Dakota, and this isn't exactly an urban state. There are little pockets of urban life, but amazingly, that book has really impacted people who, you know, if they're driving through Rapid City or driving through Sioux Falls, or they live in places where there is a lot of homelessness or unstable housing, they have expressed to me that they can't look at people who are on the streets anymore with the same kind of dismissive gaze, or actually look away from them as a way of dismissing them. And so I've been impressed by how people in a largely rural state can empathize. And this is one of the things that the arts and the humanities do for us in helping us to imagine our way inside the skins of people who are different than us and into their life experience, and to use that imaginative experience to create a different kind of life for our communities, right? And a different kind of future together. I'm an idealist in that sense, but I'm also a realist in that I know this is hard work and it's slow work and progress is not guaranteed. So we have to keep at it. Another thing I'll say is my novel, Beneath the Same Stars. This is a novel that grows out of the US-Dakota War of 1862, which was a pivotal event in this region of the country and actually in the nation's history. But yet very many people in this region have never heard about that conflict. It happened in southwestern and Minnesota, but it had direct impact on the history of South Dakota and a larger region. And so this was a conflict between the Dakota people and the Euro-American settlers around them, colonizers, whatever language we choose there. And I remember once when I was giving a presentation about the novel, and afterwards a man came up. He was in his, it looked to be his early 60s. He was obviously a Euro-American descent. And he just kind of hung back until everybody else was gone, and then came up, and he had a copy of the novel, and it was obviously many times read. And he said that he wanted to thank me, and he began to cry. And he told me that he had tried his whole life, well, not tried, he had his whole life hated Indigenous people because of what had happened to his forebears during the 1862 conflict. And he said, after reading Beneath the Same Stars, he couldn't hate them anymore because he saw Native people as human beings for the first time and realized the kind of stress they had been under and the reasons for their choices. Now, this is somebody who was well versed in the history from his own limited point of view. And it just took one novel to shift the point of view a little bit. And, you know, I don't take credit for that. There was something in his spirit, I think, that was probably tired of hating, that needed something different. And the art facilitated that, you know. So there's a co-creation that happens between, you know, among the person who creates and what is created and the person who makes contact with what has been created. And it's a magical thing. You never know what's going to happen. You just, as the creator, you have to let go of it and just let the creation have its own life as it's engaged with by other people. And it's a beautiful thing to be part of. And I can do that more broadly and more intentionally because of what the Humanities Council feeds my way and allows me to do through it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Beneath the Same Stars? Tell us the thumbnail sketch of the war for those people who are not familiar with it.
Okay, you have 2 hours. Is that what we've got? All right. So Beneath the Same Stars is based on this 1862 US-Dakota War, which is also known as the Sioux Uprising or the Dakota Conflict. There are many names for this, okay? And in 1862, in August, the Dakota people had been forced onto a reservation in southwestern Minnesota, and they did not have enough food. The rations and the other things that were to have been provided by treaty by the government were not appearing because the US was in the middle of the Civil War, and just all the things that could get in the way of treaty provisions were getting in the way. And so the people were desperate, the Dakota people, and so they rose up against the whites in the region as a matter of self-preservation. That's the way I see it. And on the first day of that war, Sarah Wakefield, an actual person who was the wife of the doctor on that reservation, she and her 2 young children were taken captive by some Dakota men. And one of those men was named Chaske, which is a birth order name. It means firstborn son, but his given name was some, if I can pronounce this, Wichopi Washdedopi, which means something like he who is liked by the stars, actual person. And the story of their relationship during Sarah's captivity became a perfect vehicle for me to explore the goings on of the war, largely from a Dakota perspective, because she was inside the Dakota camp for the entirety of the war, practically. And then my hope is that by looking at that history together through the vehicle of story, we can also have a difficult conversation around dynamics that still exist in the culture today, where indigenous cultures and settler cultures are often at odds with each other. And why is that? Well, some of the reasons go way back, and so we are making a mistake if we think that we don't still have to look at those dynamics today. And I think the more we know about the history, the more we understand those dynamics, and the more humble we can be in sitting down and having those difficult conversations together.
It seems like a very relevant conversation to have in these times when we're trying to even bury what things are popping up. And it seems like those conversations are, they're critical conversations. What kinds of things can you think of to bring those conversations forward?
Oh my, that is a really good question. Well, first of all, I would say we need to be vigilant about efforts to squash the conversation. And those are, we see those everywhere around us. It can happen at the state level with who's in the governor's mansion. It can happen at the legislative level. It can happen in our school districts by what we allow and don't allow to be talked about, of what we allow and don't allow teachers to teach. It can happen at the library level, when we might have leadership in a library that doesn't want to rock the boat. I would imagine, I don't know this, but I would imagine that this can be even hard for some place like the Humanities Council, because the Humanities Council has to rely so much on the donations, the generous donations of so many people. But a lot of times the people who have a lot of money to give have the most to lose, they think, in these sorts of conversations, because it can shake up the status quo. So how do you walk that fine line between needing the financial support while also wanting to engage in these really essential kinds of conversations that might rock the boat a little bit? I might be making up that story, but I can imagine that tension might exist within the leadership of the Humanities Council.
How about in our personal lives? What kinds of things can we do to introduce that narrative over our coffee table, or the back fence, or just bringing it up to friends and family?
I think for me, the humanities feed my true spot. That's what I call it, my true spot. They help me live from my true spot. So I was just looking again recently at the website of the Humanities Council. We celebrate literature, we promote civil conversation, we tell stories that define our state, okay? So I think it's our responsibility as people interested in humanities to ask how we do these things. How do we celebrate literature? How do we promote civil conversation? How do we tell the stories? What stories are we telling? A lot of times people will tell me they only read this genre of books or that genre of books. And I'm like, why? I mean, I understand we want to be fed in ways that are comfortable, but we have to rock our own boats if we want to rock the larger boat, So how can we use how can we break out of our habitual reading habits, which are comfortable, into something that's going to unsettle us a little bit? It's like listening to a different genre of music by intention. and the more that you do it, it's not so strange anymore.
Mhm.
So this notion of upsetting our own habits. And then when we do that, I think we become more aware of, oh, we're back in this conversation again with across the fence. We've done this. We've replayed the same conversation over and over, and it always leads X. So why are we doing this? How can we approach this conversation in a way that turns it in the same way that a poem that's a good poem will have a turn in it? We can feel the shift in our body when we get to that turn in the poem. There's something that goes, aha. To me, that's the measure of a good poem. The measure of a good conversation about the humanities, I think, is there something by which we're turning things so that we can look at them from a different angle and be surprised. And the surprise takes us down closer to our true spot. When we get down closer to our true spot, I think we can live from our true spot better, and our true spot makes it possible. It's contagious. It makes it possible for other people to find their true spots and live more intentionally from their true spots. There's my idealism coming out again.
Well, that's good idealism. That's a good place to start. I'd like to go on and look at practice. I think we have a thought, and then we may, how do you say, explore that thought. But it always seems like things don't happen until there's a practice. And so I'd like to explore how people might take a literary form, a book, a poem, and transform that into a practice.
Mm. Oh, there are so many ways, as you know, and as the people who are listening in know. But one thing I would suggest is just the old analog, get out the paper and the pencil. And as you are reading, if a phrase of the poem or in the prose jumps out at you, and you don't need to know why, just jot it down. And then use that as a journaling tool later. Take one of those phrases and just see where it takes you in your own life, or in relation to what you're reading elsewhere, or some life situation that somebody else is going through that you're concerned about. I mean, you can use it any way you want, but usually if something jumps out of us at us, there is at least a subconscious, if not a totally unconscious connection that our spirit is making with those words. And can we let that carry us somewhere? Can we practice paying attention to those nudges and following them? They drag us along by the nose. That's what the muse does. Instead of us knowing where we should be going with it, or what we should be writing about all those shoulds, we let go of all that and let the text tell us what for us in this moment is significant. And then take off writing on that. That's one thing that could be done.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you had spent some time homeless by choice to explore something. I would call that a practice. I would call that, yes, it was like, okay, I have this feeling, but I don't really understand that thing until I experience the thing. And that seems to me to be what is lacking for those who seek to explore life through books. That they start with the book, which is a reasonable place to start, an experience outside of anything they would have, but then they stop at the book. They stop at the experience that has been introduced to them, and it's all vicarious. Now, I understand someone in a wheelchair, or like in prison or something like that. There's a limit to the experiences you can have.
Yeah.
But that said, that aside, which can be also explored as to, well, are you doing what you can? But that aside, how do we go from vicarious to actual experience? Because you seem to have done that in that exploration. What prompted you or prodded you to go further?
Well, that's also a long story. So, but that's my artistic life is all wrapped up with my spiritual practice, and the practice of being present, which is also called mindfulness. It's something that I try to do all the time. I don't do it even half the time, but I'm working at it, because I believe that when we are truly present to one another, there is an amazing capacity for transformation uh, in that moment. We don't have any control over it. It does its thing. So we have to make ourselves available, first of all. That's the part of the practice that is hard, because we're all really busy. We are all busy with distractions, which our culture tends to cultivate. But we're also busy just trying to get through the hardships of our days. And so we have to make a choice. I think that's where it starts, to do something different, to make room for the practice, whether that practice is a meditative practice, or a writing practice, or a teaching practice, or a practice that will move me from the arts into my community. So it starts with a choice, and then how it happens in each life, I think we have to ask the question ourselves: what do I do? And trust that the answer is going to come. That's what happened with the emptiness of our hands. I saw this growing number of chronically homeless people living on the streets in my city. And at the same time, I knew that my city at that time was a boom town. So there's this huge discrepancy. How do I bring these two things together in my spirit? And so I just started asking myself, what can I do about this? What can I do? And, answers kind of flitted through that were easy answers for me. Oh, go serve in a soup line, go round up some donations. And all of those things would have been helpful, but they didn't feel like they were coming from my true spot. So I just kept asking the question. It took months of asking. And one day I was sitting in my office, and what I call the thing with a capital T came down and said, you need to go out and live with them. And it wasn't a decision that I made. It was put upon me. I don't explain it. I don't need to explain it. It's just what it was. And I knew I was going. It was just a question of when and how. And it was a formative event in my life, but I had to ask the question, what can I do? And keep asking it until the answer came. So I'm not going to sit here and tell everybody, this is what you need to do in order to practice this. Right. I'm going to say, make the choice to practice, start asking the question, what does this mean for my life? What can I do for my community? What do I have to give? Start asking the questions, and it will raise your consciousness to the point that the answers will come at you faster than you know what to do with.
Excellent. I would like to open it up now to our esteemed panel. Do you have questions or comments or experiences that you would like to share in terms of do you have questions of Phyllis? That's the first thing. I'll leave it there, and then we'll come back to some of the other things. Do you have any questions of Phyllis that she's brought up so far? You just have to push your uh, open your mic if you are going to say something. Otherwise, you'll be speaking into the void. Well, while people are thinking, and please do keep thinking and maybe jot down a note or two. Um,
I have a question.
yeah, sure.
Phyllis, can you recommend any books for people who are looking to expand their empathy and maybe try other genres that they aren't used to? Any books that have really impacted you personally?
You know, these kinds of questions always, with respect, to drive me nuts. Because everything just kind of goes into the hopper and gets all mixed up, and I never remember the titles of anything. This one is on my desk right now. This is The Path of Kindness, Path to Kindness, I'm sorry, Poems of Connection and Joy. And it's edited by my friend James Cruz, and I happen to have a poem in here, but that's not why I'm recommending it. I think poetry is making a comeback, especially I think during the pandemic. And I'm talking about poetry that is accessible, that you can read it once and it can go somewhere down toward your true spot, you know. And that doesn't mean that everybody has the same point of view about every poem, you know. But I think because of the condensed nature of poems, and because they can make such use of sensory detail, and because there's an elevated language there that is great for expressing wisdom, poems can be great soul food, you know. And so I would recommend a book like this to just dive into poetry, even if you were one of those people whose teacher made you hate poetry back when. My dad was such a person who hated poetry with a passion. And when my poetry anthology that I did with my friend Ruby Wilson came out, my dad said to me, "I'm never going to read it. If you want me to read what you write, you got to write in some other genre." But then somehow, when he became wheelchair bound, he picked up that book and he called me one day. My dad was not one who ever called ever, all right? But he called me out of the blue and he said, "Your pop wants to tell you that he likes these poems." He had read even the bios of the poets because he was so fascinated. And he asked me to start emailing him a poem a day. He just asked that they be relevant to his life as an old farmer. You know, so the love of the outdoors and hard work and all, you know, so Leo Dangle's poetry, you know, I just started sending him a stream of this. And then when my dad couldn't use the computer anymore, my mom would read the poems to him. And it became this three-way thing that was going on. And so I'm just saying, it's never too late to wake up to the beauty of poetry or anything else. You know, maybe his whole life he was waiting for that. But this was the time of his life when he needed it most, when he could no longer be the farmer anymore. He could read and see himself on the page, you know. So that's a roundabout way of answering your question, Ryan.
It's a good prompt for a very very important soliloquy. That was great. Anyone else have a question or comment for Phyllis? Anyone else? I don't want to step on anybody.
Well, let me step on him, Lawrence.
Okay.
I want to throw this out. It's something that you and I have talked about before too. In this very big state, that the Humanities Council helps us to bridge the big geographical divides here, all right? But there's another thing about the humanities. This is a very pragmatic state. You know, when I moved here from Ohio, it's like, oh, wow, you know, they're working hard, you know, and I saw that in Ohio, but in addition to the hard work, there was a liveliness to the arts and so on. And it's a little harder to find here. And that's one reason why I have appreciated the council in bringing those forward and encouraging people, because I think the arts are here, but they're hidden, you know, because it's like we're so pragmatic, we're so intent on getting things done that we don't always feel good about, oh yeah, but I also write poems. Oh yeah, I'm a songwriter. Oh yeah, I knit. You know, these things are like, okay, we do them in the privacy of our homes, or maybe our family knows, maybe the community knows, you know, but we're just not out there with it. The arts are good for us. We need to be out there with it. And they serve a pragmatic function too. They touch our true spots. They help us be better people. And so I think that's also something that I value about the Humanities Council, is how they help us bring the arts and other areas forward, make them more visible.
That brings us to the connection between the humanities and what we see our future as in South Dakota. We've talked about some of the past things that's happened. Are there ways that you think going forward that the Humanities Council can have an equal or greater impact on our human connection?
Wow. Yes. That's a total affirmation. The how, I don't know. I would encourage the council to continue using hybrid events. This is a very practical thing. But, you know, I was so appreciative during the pandemic, which is still ongoing in some form. But you know, the council reinvented the book festival because they realized how important it is, and made it available virtually. Well, now we're going to love getting back together, knock on wood, this September. It's a big old reunion, right? But there are also a lot of people who can't get there, not only in South Dakota, but across the country, and even people in other countries can tune in now. And so South Dakota is enriched by this contact with the wider world, and those people learn more about South Dakota. This is a huge deal. So for all kinds of reasons, I hope that we will continue to have a hybrid aspect to the festival, even once we get back face to face. And however that can happen in other venues as well, that would be great. I think that the Humanities Council can help us continue to see who's missing from the conversations that we're having in our communities, in our schools, in our public and civil life, and help us to be more civil in those civil conversations. That word civil has a double meaning, doesn't it? Civil conversations. It's about our shared life, right, as citizens, but it's also about how we conduct ourselves. And I think that our culture is coarsening, is so much more violent. It's always been violent in different ways, but it's becoming acceptable. And so by the way that the council models for us how to, and how you, Lawrence, model for us to have difficult conversations, this is really important, and to keep that going, because I don't think it's going to get better before it gets worse. This is my fear. And we have to help model how we can work at these difficult things together. These are very general things that I'm saying, but they cut deep for me. And I worry. I have had conversations within the last number of years with people about, we are in an undeclared civil war on many fronts in this country. And we think that it's not going to lead to anything. Well, it's going to lead to something. You know, and we are the ones who are going to help determine what is going to be led to, you know. So the humanities are integral, because the humanities are about helping us be more humane, are they not?
Excellent points, Phyllis.
Is it
We actually have a few people from the council, and so maybe some of them might join in and talk about, you know, what kind of ways are they thinking to add to this sort of civil conversation that we're having. What kind of things are in the mix, or things going forward? Are there new things on the horizon? Just to put them on the spot.
Oh, maybe Lee wants to talk first. I was just going to say, definitely it's not new, but we quite frequently in the last 5 to 10 years have been part of different national initiatives. One called Democracy and the Informed Citizen. Currently, we're looking at one called A More Perfect Union. And they're all meant to, through books, through speakers, through discussions, to lead to some reflection and conversation on difficult issues, whatever they may be. Now, every state humanities council maybe chooses something a little different in terms of their focus. For instance, in South Dakota, with A More Perfect Union, we're focusing on the Native American experience, and how they might have not found America to be a particularly perfect union, at least not yet. And what do we need to do to make it that? And those are difficult conversations, because a lot of people react very strongly to any kind of criticism of their nation or its government, which most of us feel, you know, is one of the best ones in the world. But different people have different experiences. And I think hearing the stories is probably the most important thing that we can do. So we try to put more information out there for people to start with, whether it's a book, like I said, or whether it's a lecture, or whether it's, you know, a film or a media project, whether it's through grants, the festival, or Speakers Bureau. And we try to put that out there so people have a starting point for those conversations. And then many of our scholars and speakers help to guide those conversations so that they stay on topic and remain respectful.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that you do that?
You know, I think part of it has to do with it, and I won't say that we have succeeded at this in any means, because a constant consideration that we have here is, how do we go beyond speaking to the choir, preaching to the choir, because people who come to our events tend to be self-selecting people that are concerned about the state of discourse in the country or the difficulty in remaining civil. So that's a constant problem. So I'd never go ahead and say this is set, we've done it, it's over. But I think one of the things that we try to do is to center some voices that might not get heard as often. So like with our One Book South Dakota with Nick Estes, who's speaking about the history of Native American resistance to various kinds of encroachment, whether it's through government or business or environmental degradation, whatever it might be. putting that voice out there is a way to help people try to see something from a new perspective. Now, it's not always going to work immediately, and there's going to be some resistance to that. But if we can say, okay, your book group usually reads the one book South Dakota, you might never have chosen this book, but maybe there's something that you can benefit from in reading it with your book club, and in having somebody guide the conversation to help make that more understandable, and to smooth the way in the times when it feels maybe painful, or maybe it feels like it's directed at them personally. That's a hard thing to get through. And I think for me, I just always come back to the idea that we all have our own individual stories and none of them are the same. And so hearing someone else's is helpful. I'm not sure any of that said anything new beyond what I had said the previous time, but there you go. It's trying to get those voices out there so people have more that they can consider.
I would like to just to take off on what you just said and introduce another potential way to expand what you're doing, and that would be to include some experiences in the cognitive, let's say, exercises that we do. In other words, if we have a book festival or a book author to talk about a certain thing, for example, like Phyllis's book, what can we do to have some experiences to send people? It's kind of like sending people on a walkabout and then having them to come back and talk about what they experienced. Because at least for me, a thing isn't a thing until you experience it in some way. It's kind of like you can read a lot of cookbooks, but until you cook something, you don't really know how to cook, and you don't really understand the food. Even if you ate the food, there's something about actually preparing the food that you taste the food in a whole different way. And so I'm let's say, I would say concerned. That might sound too serious, but I would like to see us have more experiences and just kind of connect our head to our bodies. Let's put it that way, that there's something that I know because I experienced it. I forget the name of the tribe now, but there's a tribe I heard about in South America that in their language, you can't express anything that you haven't experienced personally. There's no grammatical form to express something that you haven't done yourself. So the idea of saying John did that is not a thing unless you have done it too, and that always struck me as like, that's something to think about. But then I want to not stop at my experiences, but go on and hear experience someone else's experiences, but then make some attempt to experience something like that myself, because it doesn't seem like it's a thing until then. I think, Lee, were you going to say something?
Yeah, on the same line. And I like all these ideas, but I was thinking an experience that I had that helps. It takes one person to reach out. And it seems simple, but it really works. I was thinking, I'm in a different stage in my life. And so I just thought, I like to experience new things. And I thought maybe somebody else who has just lost their mate might be wanting to. And so I suggested going to the symphony, the arts. And it was about diversity, and it was worldwide. And if anybody didn't go to the symphony, you missed an outstanding presentation. And to have the discussion before the symphony, getting to know the writer of the symphony that was produced, it was eye-opening what my friend said afterwards. You know, they really do. They're really human. They do have feeling and talent. We were just going on and on. But what I'm trying to say is you plant a seed and it does grow, not the way you always want it, but it starts something. So you have provided so many wonderful opportunities in this land of the Dakotas or the prairie. But it does take individuals reaching out, not in a pushy way. Just think of creative ways of including someone that might need it that you don't even expect. So that does help. And you have a very civil conversation because you are going through the back door or something. I don't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else have some question, comment? Want to leave it open as anyone else?
Hey, Lawrence, while we're letting people ponder what they want to ask next, may I share something that kind of—
Absolutely.
I got to get up just a second. So this is a follow-up on this notion of getting into your bodies a little, getting it, if we get into our bodies, out of our heads. I was over in Minnesota at New Ulm, which during the US Dakota War was attacked, I think, 3 times. Very proud German community, okay? And very proud of their resistance to the native attacks. And they have a period of time every summer when they kind of indulge in kind of a nostalgic observance of their pride around these things. And I was invited to be a speaker based on Beneath the Same Stars. And it's a challenging conversation to have because I don't want to disrespect that community and its heritage and so on, but it's more complicated than that, the history is. And at a certain point in the presentation, I was telling them about the Dakota woman who was one of my primary resource people in educating me about Dakota language and life ways and spirituality and so on. And I told them about the day that she presented me and my family with eagle feathers. And she stored them in this box. I'm not going to say any more about the little ceremony, but this box that she stored them in on a bed of dried sage and cedar leaves is engraved with German words. And when I showed this box to the people in New Ulm, there was a gasp that went up. The proximity of the 2 cultures, the German and the native feathers inside, the significance of the choice of the box. I mean, I don't think that Chekpawi chose this box by accident. She knew what she was doing. She was uniting the 2 cultures in a bond that the eagles speak of, right? And so I heard that gasp and I knew what I had to do with this box. I asked the people, I said, do not open the box out of respect for what's inside, but I want to pass this around and I want you to present it to each other. And so they did that. It went all the way around the room. The room was packed with about 150 people. It was standing room only, you know. And there's something, I think, that having touched the box, it isn't a magical thing. It's getting it out of the head, down lower toward that true spot in our bodies, you know. And I like to think that that shifted something for some people, you know. I know that some people go out and they walk the land where the events happen, you know, and they often come into contact with Native people who are the guardians of that land, the caregivers to that land. And maybe something happens there too. But again, getting out there, getting off the pages of the book, that's what you're talking about. And there are different ways of our facilitating that.
Exactly. And these are like, I call them low hanging fruit kind of opportunities to experience a book or writing or a poem or something, but then really savor it by living it, by having an experience that's connected to it. Even something as simple as holding a box, you know, or walking the land, but something that you do so that it's no longer some kind of abstract intellectual exercise, but you become the thing.
Mhm.
For me, if a book or speech or some words, if they don't change you, I'm really not seeing the point. You know, it doesn't have to be catastrophic, some life-changing, pivotal 45-degree change. Even if it's a half a degree change, time is a universal lever, and it will make some big changes over time. Everybody's on a pivotal point every day in our lives. The question is, which pivot are we going to take? And that's where I see the books and new experiences and listening to music and talking with your friend next door. They can be a good starting point. But
This is Gabrielle.
Yes, go ahead, Gabrielle.
One of the things I noticed from participating in the Dakota commemorative walks and the Dakota Wixuya Memorial Horse Ride is that when we travel to different communities, that those people that are interested in educating themselves and wanting to see society change, that they need action items of how they can do that. And that helps. That's another way to help people break through the difficulty of feeling, you know, some kind of guilt or responsibility for past challenging historical after effects. And so I agree with you that it starts with small steps, you know, educating yourself to the history, and then having action items that people can help contribute to creating change. It could be like donating books to a library or donating to the commemorative events, doing a cookie drive or bake sale to help, you know, with some of these issues. But I think all those small steps are really important. And as people engage and become a part and continue to learn, it helps create the atmosphere so that change can be made. Because even though there have been laws and court cases to change some of these societal inequities, it doesn't reach to the grassroots of how people can personally and communities can personally, you know, have action items to help create that change. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you so much for that, Gabrielle. That's exactly, you made an eloquent point, and you made it eloquently. You know? Well, we actually at our 11:30 drop the mic time. I want to thank everybody for participating with us. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for filling an hour with some very delightful and informative actions and all of that, all the good stuff. All right, thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time, same station, same place, same station. Bye.